10 amazing stories that we're going to be releasing in this anthology, which is called Voices of Varuna. So with me today are two of that volume's contributors, John Peel and Wunji Lau. So welcome, guys. Really happy to have you on. First of all, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to our viewers. John, you want to go first?
Okay. I'm John Peel. I've been writing, oh goodness, about 40 years or so now. And I'm at the point where I can
not like you on camera.
I'm at the point where I can pick and choose whatever I want to do rather than what I have to do to earn a living. And when this original call for stories came out, it sounded so intriguing that I just couldn't resist. And I was very lucky to be, selected as one of the first ones. I'm very happy about that.
So, John, just give us a brief run of some of the titles that you've written for.
Oh, well, I've created my own young adult fantasy series. One was Diadem, Worlds of Magic, and the other one is Dragon Home. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of tie-ins because I tend to like playing in other people's universes when I can get away with it. So I've written tie-ins for Doctor Who, Star Trek, Outer Limits, The Avengers, all these sort of things that I enjoy playing with. And as I say, officially I'm retired, but unofficially I'm working harder than ever because now I can pick my own projects, as I say, which is much more interesting for me.
Yeah, I think that's every writer's dream at this point.
Yes, it is. And I'm glad to have got to that point eventually.
So Wunji, let us know who you are.
Hi, well, I'm Wunji Lau, and I do not quite have John's resume. I can dream of having that someday. I've been writing for about 20 years. My background is in various industries, so a lot of my writing is done in biotech and in engineering, but I've had a lifelong love of science fiction and fantasy, and a lifelong love of tabletop gaming. So most of my writing has been done with games like Heavy Gear, Jovian Chronicles. This was, oh goodness, 15 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And I've done some fiction writing. I did some short stories for a couple of anthologies. Women in Practical Armor, the European Space Agency did a couple of anthologies back in the early 2000s. I wrote for that. And recently I did another story for an anthology called Hellcats.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I've been a Renegade Legion fan for, well, since the original came out. I never played it much, but I really loved it. I loved the imagery. I particularly loved Leviathans, these vast starships. And I understood at the time, I was a kid, I understood, of course, I mean, it's a riff on Star Wars, but with, space Romans. But still loved it, and then kind of let it lie fallow for a while. And then I saw this project being put about, and actually Dale told me about it. And I absolutely had to do it. And the more I read about it, the more excited I was, because here's a universe that's got its limits. It's got a set theme, but it's also a playground. It's a fresh place to be creative. There's no set required lore saying you can't be on this planet at this time because the Empire wasn't there at this date, or this character didn't have his powers yet, and so they can't do that, and all the other aspects of the fun parts of playing in someone else's world, but also the limitations.
Yep. So John, your story is called Finneran's Way. And it wrestles, as I understand it, and as I read, and one of the things I loved about it is that it wrestles with the intrinsic concept of good and evil, especially from a lower civilization to a higher one. So could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, I'm always wary of people who are villains, pure and simple. I always think in their own minds, nobody's a villain.
Hmm.
They don't go around, twirling their mustaches and whatever from Disney movies. Um, they have reasons that they believe in for what they're doing. I mean, we can't possibly, we don't actually see the world they see, but in their own overview of things, what they are doing is justified. And I like the idea to taking a terrible act of terrorism and making the terrorists kind of likable, in the sense that the reason that they hold off from acting for a while is because they want to make sure nobody suffers. They don't mind killing them, they just don't want to actually make them suffer while they die. And it just struck me that this was an interesting kind of concept for the antagonists, really, that they should have a certain measure of compassion, which you don't normally see in terrorists, obviously. Right. Otherwise they wouldn't act that way. But these are aliens, so their logic is not necessarily our logic, and that's what I like to be able to play with, is to see it from a completely different perspective, one that internally makes sense to them, but when you're looking in from the outside, it looks rather bizarre, I think. And it was kind of interesting to explore this concept of people who are not terrible, evil creatures necessarily, just doing evil things. And of course, they see it from the other way around. When they're looking at the humans in the story, they don't think the humans are terribly evil. They're just in the way. And something has to be done about them. So I'm trying very hard not to give away the plot, of course.
Yeah, I understand. So Wunji, you had a chance to read it, yeah?
Yes, I did. And I wanted to ask, so obviously the title is a reference, but I wanted to ask, so are we referencing Joyce or are we referencing the drinking song?
The drinking song, trust me.
Okay. I didn't see any 100-letter words in there, so.
Yeah, I've always loved Irish music, and Finnegan's Wake is one of my favorite songs. Though I have to confess here, I did not come up with that title. My title was completely different.
That's very true.
Ben came up with the title, and I just simply loved it.
Yeah,
perfect for me.
Yeah, when John turned in his first script or his first draft, he had named the plant, at the time it was a planet, he named it Finneran, and the first thing that popped in my mind was Finnegan's Wake. And I love making titles have dual meanings. That's one of my like writer quiches, is that I really love to make dual layers in a lot of things. And so it just, for some reason, it just popped in my head, made sense. I retitled it that way, put it in the document that everyone saw, everyone's pitch summaries. And John emailed me immediately. He's like, I love that title. We've got to keep it. And I'm like, okay, cool by me.
Yes, we're obviously thinking along the same lines without realizing it.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I mean, especially, I also don't want to give away the plot, but I mean, the dual meaning of the word wake in the song, where, Finnegan, we're mourning him, but he resurrects and he wakes up. I mean, that's reflected in the story as well. I mean, it's a great parallel.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
As I say, it didn't occur to me, it occurred to Ben, and then as soon as he said it, the lights went on and I was like, yes, that's exactly right. Perfect.
Yeah. So, and I got the impression that you've worked with academics before.
I'm sorry?
I got the impression that you'd worked with academics before. Your academic characters have a style and behavior that is very familiar to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that just rings true.
Yeah, I could actually hear that character talking in my head because I had a professor that spoke just like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. We all have educators somewhere along the line, if we're lucky, like that.
Yep. So Wunji, your story is called All is Green with the Queen, and it's a different type of tale. I like it because it's the underdog and there's some great combat scenes in it, as well as the snark that just rolls off these characters. Absolutely brilliant. So tell us more about your take and how you came up with that particular idea.
Well, actually, so I just started with the odd couple pairing, the classic odd couple. You put two people together in a remote area and just let them have that for a while. And then from there, I always like the idea. I think it's a pretty common fiction lesson, the idea that you take three separate stories, you jam them together, and then you have actually one good story.
Right.
So that's where I pulled in these other characters and the events that take place. I wanted to bring in the Renegades for sure. And I agree with John very much that it's more interesting to have people who aren't outright antagonists, who aren't outright villains, or who aren't mustache twirling evil. And in this case, our evil is exclusion and racism, right? Both the Union and the TOG have their different perspectives on alien races, on what's important in being sentient. And neither of them are truly wrong and neither of them are truly right. They've all got sort of a reasonable perspective. And so I wanted to put these perspectives together in a room and have them clash with each other without anybody necessarily coming off as being any more than generally irked, but not evil.
Right.
Mhm.
And I will jump in right now, and I'll say too, we made it as we made a point as a design team to remove racism and call it speciesism. So
Yeah.
race doesn't exist, and it's species. So, and it's and we all catch each other ourselves that way. But I want to make everyone understand we're looking forward. This is 75. This is the 75th century. So we are way past a lot of settings, and we assume a lot more about the growth of humanity and first encounters and all that kind of stuff. So we've progressed past that, the baseline idea of racism, and we've moved into speciesism, which is more explained in the setting and things. And as you begin to, as readers unwind themselves into the Renegade Legion universe, they'll understand all of these conceptings. But the baseline is, and it's a great showcase. What you did with All Green the Queen is these inherent biases that exist that you can easily equate to now, these inherent biases, these inherent reactions, and then growth that comes as well based on relationships and actions of people. By the end of it, there's a common gesture that runs all the way through that starts out as meaning one thing, and by the time you get to the end, it means something completely different. And that is absolutely key as a great theme all the way through the story.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to use that gesture to sort of punctuate those moments, but then the flow of the story also leads to a point of, if not total understanding, partial understanding, of compassion and mutual interest, such that these people who actually don't really like each other very much are at the end still willing to die for each other.
Yeah. I have to admit, I really enjoyed the interplay between the two major characters, Vam and Chitsi, if I'm saying it right.
Or Kritzy, yeah.
I like the interplay between the characters. You built up the sympathy for them, and then threw them into a really horrendous situation together, which I think comes over very well in the story. It's the underdog, facing horrible odds, actually insurmountable odds, let's face it.
Yeah.
And then you've got the reader, I think, rooting for them to win somehow, even if you can't quite see how they're going to manage it. And that's always a great way of writing a story, I think. It really draws the reader in.
Yep.
And I'm really thankful to Ben for giving me, I think it was an extra 1,000 words to get in some extra development and conversation, because I was actually very worried that things were moving along so fast that I wasn't able to spend as much time with the characters as I wanted.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think in this case, rather than edit back, I think the extension actually enhanced that the combat portion of the story and made it a lot more gripping, I think. in that way. And interesting side note to all the viewers watching this. So part of the process of writing these, Wunji actually challenged the development team with regards to how grav tank combat worked. Because every day, actually almost every hour, he was coming up with some really crazy ideas as to how particular systems worked. And so all of a sudden we ran into tangents of how does a crew eject from a tank? Does it happen at, base level? Is it with 2,000 meters in the air? What does that look like? Induction fields, is that like a push or a pull? I mean, all these different things. And he forced us. These were things that we shelved off to the side for when we go into the role-playing game aspect, which will be next year. And we were just going the fast and loose table dynamics of this whole process. So it was really cool to be faced with those issues now so that we could lay a baseline, because that does play in part with Bev Vincent's story, as well as I think there's actually in mine, a little bit of mine. So there's a little bit of that commonality there, but Wunji was definitely, and it's your biotech and technical training that really just kind of pushed us to really, I think it really paid off too, because it really strengthened the stories.
It's the training and also the pedantic game designer in me. The incurable gamer nerd who stands at the table going, well, I see that in chapter 2, your unit has done this, and in chapter 3 it does this, and that's a contradiction. Worst story ever. Yeah. So doing that, I've gotten used to that. So I tend to ask a lot of questions. I mean, recognizing in the course of writing fiction, I never like putting a lot of technical explanation in there. I really don't need to say that my character fired his X-27 hyper laser rifle with 4 rounds that do 3 points of damage at each time. But I do want to have all that underlying it, and I want to have all the technology laid out perfectly beneath it so that I know what I'm working with.
Yeah, a lot of writers, a lot of people don't necessarily realize that writing, especially short stories, the writer is actually working like an iceberg, where the tip that they're seeing, that they're enjoying, there's an enormous mountain of information that we've been gathering and researching and doing and thinking about and writing into the notes of our drafts. And I mean, at the development team, we had so many comment notes running down the side of many of the stories, just because we were defining these things as we went, some of it. And we had a writer's Bible we had for all of you guys to start with, but we admitted up front, we didn't have all the answers, and we were looking for you guys to help us kind of shape that. And boy, you guys jumped in and did that. I know some writers like Sarah Stegall, she fixated on the Cadrona species and went so bore into it. The story that she has is so great, but she's also developed this enormous amount of information that's going to be helpful later on when we do, source material for it. So I've got to ask, and I don't know if you guys had a chance to read all the stories in the anthology yet or not.
No, not yet, I'm afraid.
Okay, so you're forgiven if you don't necessarily know the answer to this, but I would be curious to know, besides the 2 that you guys have read, is there another story in there that you really feel excites you, that you're looking forward to the public actually reading and getting excited about?
Actually, it is Sarah's story with the Cardrona that I'm really interested in seeing how people write. Oh, and who did the one on the Cartis? Was it Kat?
Yeah, that was Kat Sato.
Yes, both of those, because those really delve deep into some interesting alien and cultural aspects that I didn't get to explore. I mean, my characters are, I made them alien, but functionally they're human actors in, alien suits, Yeah. But no, whereas, we have some really alien aliens in the Cardrona. We have some really alien aliens presented in the structure of the Cartis. And yeah, I'd love to see what people's reactions are to those. Those really sort of illustrate a nice distinct aspect of this reborn universe.
Cool. All right. So anything else you guys want to talk about really quick about the anthology? Otherwise, we'll just wrap it up.
Well, John, I actually wanted to ask, so you have written like 100 novels. It's a vast amount of work. And I wanted to know, like, since you're a tie-in writer, you surely worked with like some really vast writer's Bibles with having to absorb a lot of information. So here, is this different with having essentially more of a playground, or on the other hand, having more of a burden of having to come up with something without without sort of the help of a Bible, or without having something to consult?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, what usually happens is if I read a proposal or a request for a proposal, like with this, I mean, we only had what, 2 or 3 pages of notes,
Right.
to work from, because at that point it was still coming into creation. But what I always look for is there something in here that intrigues me? Is there something I can play with? And I can give you a concrete example. Like, for example, when I was asked to do a Star Trek novel, there are a lot of, I mean, you've got huge amounts of information out there on Star Trek, let's face it. But they had one set rule, which was everything has to be explicable. There's no magic in this universe. So I immediately thought, right, how can I write a story about magic in the Star Trek universe? Because that was, I mean, nobody else was going to do it because they were told they couldn't. So, I mean, I have that kind of burst mentality, you know, that I have to play where I'm supposed to be not playing. And in this case, having so few notes was a big help, because although I had a vague outline concept, I could throw in whatever I felt like could be fun in this, and without worrying about whether it's going to conflict with something that was established 17 books ago that I haven't actually read. So I found it very freeing to be able to do this. And one of the good things about it is you can trust your editor, if you're lucky, you can trust your editor to say, no, you can't do that, stop it. Which is what I need quite a lot of the time, is some, you know, I always like to work with an editor, because to me, writing isn't a solitary process. It's always at least between you and the editor before it even becomes, you know, obviously before the readers. So if you get a good editor, and I thought Ben did a very nice job, especially, as I say, he pulled the perfect title out of the thin air. So, you know, when you've got a good editor like that, you can trust them to tell you if you're doing something wrong, or if it's not going to fit in with somebody else's story. And then you can just go off and do your own thing, which is what I was pleased to do here. It's a lot harder when you're working in a more established universe, because, I mean, then the rules are all laid down, and unless you happen to remember them all, you know, you're going to run into trouble sooner or later. So I actually found this very freeing.
Yeah, yours actually was one of the few stories that we really did not have a lot of. I mean, there were a couple of concepts we had to make sure weren't coming through, but the adaptability, the suggestions we made, the adaptability that you had, I mean, it just was, I think yours was one of the first ones done, frankly, because it was so, it wasn't focused on all this other detail that wasn't necessary. You focused exactly on one of the pillars that we were looking for. And that's, I think, what really nailed that story down. And several of the others that are in this anthology are the same way. And so, like, when I was talking about early on, we were looking for a diversity of stories and characters and all this other stuff. You know, we were looking for diversity of genres. Ultimately, we would love to see like mystery and romance novels then set in this universe coming out. And one of the things we really were aiming for is like key themes outside of technology. Like we're trying to examine like what is it, like the question of, you know, what is it to be human that far away with all this other new understanding. You know, we're still looking at all the same moral problems that we all wrestle with. And a lot of those stories do kind of aim, you know, like even though Wunji's is extremely great on action and comedy, it is also very solid on dealing with that idea of ultimately core racism, which we then have turned into speciesism. Right. But the baseline understanding is still the same, and dealing with that in that theme. And then, you know, Cats deals with relationships and, you know, the quandaries that come into play with that. Mine deals more with like, what is history, what is valuable and not, as well as is revenge justified and is it not, in those senses. So I mean, everyone brought something layered to the table, and I think that's why we really were drawn to these stories. So so I really thank you guys for jumping in tonight and talking. I'm really excited to see how people receive these stories from you guys. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll do really well, and we'll see more than just another anthology. We'll see a few more coming up down the line, and you know, we'll invite you guys back to create some more great content stories for us in the
with Wunji is I mean, it's quite clear he could do so much more with those characters.
Yeah.
And it's a great start. It's like, okay, more.
Yeah. Yep. When you walk away knowing that you want to know what happens next to them, you know you've sold it as a character, and you've got four great characters there that you know, I would love to look back and see how we can explore more with them. It's such a huge universe. When we're talking, I think we estimated like tens of thousands of stars in this entire setting scape that we have. You know, we're obviously going to fixate on a couple of different deep characters, but we also want the field open for everybody else to play around with. But yeah, it's a great start. So
had a lot of fun.